Oh. Hello there. I feel so studious, my little ponytail and my gray turtleneck. Do you guys want to know the joke that I was originally gonna make for this opening? I was gonna chief it up and then be like, hello, hi, yeah, I wanted to start the year on a high note. And then I was like, there's no way that I'm getting faded just to make that joke, because then I would have had trouble remembering my lines. It would have been a whole thing. Don't worry, you'll get some high kai in the very near future. Anyway, you know why I've gathered you all here today. Obviously, judging by the title, I'm here to sacrifice your souls. No, I'm just kidding, but you can sacrifice your soul to me by clicking subscribe or the notification bell or the like button. You know the drill. I've said it before and I'll say it again. If you enjoy having a weird goth girl tell you what to do, then this is the place for you. That rhymed. I feel like Dr. Seuss. Okay, let's stop messing around. Let's be serious. I have gathered you here today because it's time to break down everything that I watched in December, starting with TV shows. Finally got around to finishing Dead to Me and quite a few others. I watched a lot of non-horror movies, which we'll be covering next, so I'm sorry for my horror babes, but there will be timestamps linked down below as always if you just want to skip ahead. Then we'll discuss all my horror rewatches. How did I feel about things like Lights Out and Krampus upon my second viewing? A lot of Christmas horror in that category. Also a lot of Christmas horror in the next category, which would be new watches of old horror movies. I finally checked out the Black Christmas fan film It's Me, Billy, among some others. Finally, we'll talk about new releases and a couple of Christmas movies in there as well. Of course, we'll talk about Christmas Bloody Christmas, Speak No Evil, and more. I've mentioned this in the past. December is usually like my least horror-y month of the year because I'm surrounded by family, so just watching a lot more non-horror. I'll try to be brief with the non-horror stuff, but I did watch a couple new releases that I really enjoyed, and I also assure you that my January recap will look much different. I'm already starting this year off watching more horror. Before we even get into today's video, I'm gonna kick things off with a little bit of drama, because that's how my year started. Again, timestamps linked down below if you do not want the tea. As you probably know, Cody Leach gave me a shout out. It was completely unexpected, just a really nice gesture from him. And he was getting some really misogynistic comments from men that were just saying, you just think she's hot. And even pushing back when his subscribers or Cody responded and they were like, you know, he's married. And they were like, oh, just because he's married doesn't mean he can't be thirsty. That's how they sound. That's how they sound in my head. So on Twitter, Cody was basically like, do better, gents. And I responded too because I'm sick of it. I kind of made a joke like, oh, my hotness got me in trouble, like really? But then I was also like, yeah, I stupidly forgot that as a woman, that's all I have to offer. Before anyone is like, oh, Kylie, don't let it get you down. Trust me, I don't. You don't think I know how much smarter I am than those idiots? How much more talented I am? It's still just annoying to deal with misogyny. That's the world that we live in. It's fucking annoying and ridiculous. Men project the idea that the only reason why a larger creator could be shouting me out is because I'm hot. So we agree, you do think I'm hot. But beyond that, in their tiny smooth brains, they can't comprehend a woman being worth more than what she looks like. Just fully exposing themselves as bigots, well done. So props to Cody because his behavior should kind of be the bare minimum that we expect, but unfortunately, I don't think that most men would have spoken up for me like that. He's an ally.
Ally.
I'd just like to encourage that behavior because those men obviously don't really respect women for their intelligence or opinions, and they're much more apt to listen to you men. So of course, go check out Cody. You're probably already a fan, but I also really enjoyed his 2022 horror ranking video. That's all. There's my rant for the day. Let's kick things off with all the TV shows that I watched, starting with season 6 of Rick and Morty. Speaking of annoying men, there's not much about the show itself that I don't think I haven't said, so I will say this. Some of the audience is so horrible because they think that Rick and Morty is this like esoteric niche thing that only individualistic geniuses could understand. Rick is this super individualistic, nothing matters, so I rule the universe kind of a guy, and so obviously a lot of Elon Musk fans are into that, and I think that has a beautiful irony because especially in the last few seasons, they've been trying to pivot Rick's character away from that because he's going through character development. The show has also always been very self-aware about how awful Rick is, so I really get a kick out of of how stupid a lot of Rick's fans are. And the show is funny. I love the show, by the way. So season 6, I think, was a lot better than season 5, but I still found the finale to be kind of underwhelming. It was all just one big setup for season 7. The next show I watched with family would be The Santa Clauses. We watched this because my family is huge on the Santa Claus from the 90s, but this show was just one big woof. I don't know who the target audience was, I really don't. The only people who would care about this show are like 40 years old now, but it was written as if they expected only 5-year-olds to be watching it. So needless to say, that was probably one of the worst nostalgic reboots I've seen so far. Next up is Dead to Me Season 3. It's a dark comedy on Netflix starring the wonderful Linda Cardellini and Christina Applegate. This follows Jen and Judy in the wake of crime and tragedy as they evade the law, develop complicated relationships, and try to keep a family together. This show is bonkers. Like, I highly recommend it. However, sadly, between seasons 2 and 3, Christina Applegate was diagnosed with MS, which, if you don't know, it's a disease that causes a ton of horrible symptoms. They can range from leg numbness to pain to weight gain to extreme fatigue. So she shot the final season while in the throes of all the terrible symptoms of this disease. It's extremely admirable, and in interviews she said that it was the hardest thing she's ever done. So tremendous respect for the commitment to come back and shoot this season no matter how hard it was, and giving us fans the end of the story. Kind of. For whatever reason, they still left season 3 on a little bit of a cliffhanger. Why? Don't know, because she's an executive producer on the show, she has a lot of power over what they do, and she has said that this might be the last thing she ever acts in, season 3. And this last season really paled in comparison to the first 2 seasons, which were both incredible. So season 3 was a bit of a letdown for sure, and I am just genuinely confused about the future of the show. The last show I have to talk about today is probably my favorite thing that I watched in the entire month. I think that it's perfect. I finally watched Midnight Gospel on Netflix. A space caster traverses trippy worlds inside his universe simulator, exploring existential questions about life, death, and everything in between. Needless to say, this is my shit right here. I know I'm so late to this party, but God, what a great show. What makes it so unique is the format, and I don't even know if I can adequately explain this. It's basically a podcast whose visuals kind of feed the narrative that his guest star is explaining. So far, one of my favorite episodes is episode 5, The Annihilation of Joy, which explores the Buddhist concept of the Bardo loop. It's too much for my smooth brain to explain, but the show does an incredible job. There are so many interesting spiritual topics too, and it's really cool to see very level discussions about different religions. And of course, it's all accompanied by the most psychedelic visuals that you'll ever see, and not every episode is about religion, it's all just very spiritual stuff. Like, one episode is about music. I'm so sad that it was canceled after only 1 season, but at least we have this one. Now, moving on to all the non-horror movies that I watched this month, and like I said, there are a lot of them. So I'll do my best to kind of get right through these because a lot of them are rewatches, including the first movie, which is Superbad. You guys know that this is one of my favorite 420 watches. I was just due for a rewatch. I also watched The World's End for the very first time. This follows a group of washed up friends as they go back to their hometown to try to finally complete the World's End challenge, having a pint from all 12 pubs in town in one night when a sci-fi twist takes the night for an extreme turn. I thought this movie was okay. I love Simon Pegg and Nick Frost so much, but I just didn't find this movie funny. And beyond that, I found the story and the characters to be only okay. I'm still a huge Edgar Wright girl. I'm really looking forward to checking out Hot Fuzz now. You guys probably know him from Last Night in Soho. He's an incredible director, but this one was just a miss for me. So was Strange World, the new Disney animated movie that's in theaters. It was really generic, and beyond that, I don't really have anything to offer. If you thought that movie studios would stop making the "it's not my dream, Dad, it's yours" movies, you'd be sorely mistaken, because that's all that Strange World was. I also rewatched Freaky Friday, one of my favorites from childhood. The Fabelmans would be up next, the new Steven Spielberg love letter to cinema. This movie was really cute, and it definitely shows off Seth Rogen's drama acting chops. I'm so glad he's on this level now. Not enough people give him praise for his range. This one's definitely going to be up there for Best Picture contender. The only other thing I would see beating it out is probably Everything Everywhere All at Once. Everything Everywhere should win, but the Academy is stank, and so I wouldn't be that surprised if The Fabelmans won over it because, you know, white people. I like The Fabelmans though, it was really good, but it's not the one that I'm rooting for. Next we have Moon Age Daydream, the epic, surreal David Bowie documentary about his life. I also saw it in IMAX, and that was a little bit too overwhelming, but I do recommend this one for any fellow trippy heads out there. There's no real plot to this. It's just 2 hours of footage from his life showing how talented and well-traveled he was. I think this one has also made the shortlist for the Oscars as well. I continued my Marvel behind the scenes marathon this month. I watched the making of Eternals. I love Chloe Zhao and seeing all the mind-numbing work that goes behind making these massive movies, so I highly recommend. Ooh, next is Pinocchio, Del Toro's new love child. A father's wish magically brings a wooden boy to life, but they're soon met with many a challenge as Italy becomes embroiled in fascism. The animation category this year at the Oscars is gonna be insane, but I do think that this one is gonna win. Turning Red is probably also gonna be up there, and when did this turn into Haunted Hippie Oscar predictions? Sorry. I just watched a lot of the critical darlings in the last couple months, and I love following the Oscars. It's like my version of following football. But Pinocchio was great, very solid, surprisingly heart-wrenching film. White Christmas is up next, one of my favorite Christmas movies of all time. However, huge trigger warning, it was only upon this rewatch, like my 1000th time seeing this movie, that I realized there's a song where they briefly sing about loving minstrel shows. I guess I didn't know what that was the last time we watched this movie a couple years ago. I'm not sure. But minstrel shows, if you somehow don't know what they are, they're nothing to be singing about loving, that's for sure. That's also how Shane Dawson became famous, remember? The 50s were a wild time in the entertainment business. I didn't realize that was something they'd still be singing about, but besides that, the movie is great. Speaking of great, Avatar: The Way of Water, what a film. I had to let my high ass take the reins when rating this movie because I took an edible to go see this in theaters in 3D. Don't worry, my dad drove me. I was so completely immersed, and I know that some people had the opposite experience. One of my friends was like, I was so high, I couldn't take it seriously. I was like, sign language whales? Nah. And I responded that I was like, sign language whales? Sign me up. I was so high, and I was so smitten by this gorgeous movie. I have such a bleeding heart for environmentalism too, and so these movies make me extremely emotional. I have to look away sometimes, otherwise I'll start crying when the colonizers start doing their colonizer shit. I gave it a perfect score because, like I said, I let Hi Kylie have nice things sometimes. I'm for sure gonna go see it in IMAX when I'm back home in LA. Next up, my Christmas Eve watch was weirdly Wine Country. It's a Netflix comedy that came out a couple years ago, and it's a stacked cast of comedians. It just follows a bunch of middle-aged women on their trip to Napa Valley and the various drunken hijinks they get into. I surprisingly loved this, but I think it has to do with the fact that I watched it with like all the women in my family. It was a great group activity, but I have a feeling that if I watched it alone, I probably wouldn't have liked it as much. It was really fun with a group of gal pals though. I think it could be a new tradition. Now, Puss in Boots: The Last Wish was one of the biggest surprises of the month. This follows Puss in Boots on his last life as he searches for the star that will grant him the wish to get his lives back. This movie was almost perfect, save for some of the childish humor in it. I don't understand why it's still insisted upon that there should be stupid humor in children's movies. They're smarter than you give them credit for, and I don't want them growing up in a world thinking that dumb things are funny. They deserve better. Other than that, perfect film. Takes full advantage of animation as a medium, and it's a very emotional and immersive epic experience. As is Babylon. Holy hell. Babylon is a Hollywood epic that follows an ensemble of characters and their various triumphs and failures in the industry as it transitions from silent film to sound. I am one of the rare few claiming this to be one of the best films of the year. It's one of the most depraved things I think I've ever seen, maybe even more so than Wolf of Wall Street. But when you're a 37-year-old Oscar winner who studios write blank checks for, you better make some crazy shit like this. This was a love letter to cinema. It was a hate letter to cinema. I interpreted this movie as saying the industry is horrible. It will use and abuse you without a second thought, but in 100 years, people will still be watching the movies that you made. You are immortal. But people do not like this movie. I mean, my God, a 55% on Rotten Tomatoes. Most of the complaints are that the movie is a narrative mess, but I didn't find it to be that way. I found it to be really similar to a lot of any other kind of slice of life films. Wasn't hard for me to follow in the slightest. Some people complain that sexism in directing wasn't explored or that racism wasn't explored enough, but they dug pretty deep with each character that they followed, and I feel like you can't do everything. And sometimes I like to envision a past where I wouldn't have been laughed out of a studio for daring to say that, hey, I want to direct something. I get why that can be problematic or perceived as ill-researched, but I enjoy it from time to time. I love this movie. I would also see it in IMAX if Avatar wasn't hogging all the screens, but oh well. The last non-horror movie that I watched is A Knight's Tale. This is a rather strange one. Heath Ledger's character is born as a poor boy who grows up to pursue knighthood and ends up falling in love with a forbidden lady. This movie is so strange, I can't really begin to cover it. Most of that can all be chalked up to the fact that it was 2001, which was a rather strange time for cinema. Like, this movie is weirdly modern with period inaccurate clothing, a very modern soundtrack, and it didn't have enough self-awareness to pull that off, I don't think. So the viewing experience is very confusing, to put it lightly. Also, all the characters are very stupid, so it's kind of a fun watch if you're watching it with a friend and you can kind of add your own commentary with them. It's on Netflix now if you are a big Heath Ledger fan, or Paul Bettany, he stars in it as well. I don't really recommend it though. Let us move on to all my horror rewatches of the month, and remember, it's a lot of Christmas stuff. Krampus is up first. I think this was my third or fourth time watching the movie, and I'm pleased to report that it's still just as fun. I love all the creature design. I love how much this movie hates Republicans. I love Toni Collette and Adam Scott. This movie's just a treat. It's still a 3.5 out of 5 star movie for me because sometimes it's a little more stupid than I would care for, but it's a great one to watch around the holidays. The Terminator was another rewatch for me, and I love this franchise, one of my favorites of all time. But I rewatched this movie drunk, and tell me why that made this movie seem worse. I feel like when I'm drunk, I have a lot less patience, and so sometimes the slower parts of this movie started to drag really badly. When I'm high, I'm queen patience, and I just lock in. I can go out and just stare at my mom's chickens for like 20 minutes, so maybe that has something to do with it. I never thought I'd see the day where I'd lower my ranking to 3.5 stars for the first film. Maybe that'll change upon another sober rewatch. Black Christmas was, of course, another December rewatch. If you didn't catch it, you should watch the replay of the stream that I did with my dad about it. It was a spoiler chat of the movie, and it was also his first time ever seeing it. We also watched The Nightmare Before Christmas for his first time ever, and we did a special Patreon video for it. So join us over there for fun bonus content like that. It's linked down below. That movie is so weird, but I do get more into it with every rewatch, so I'm glad for that. Better Watch Out was another rewatch for this year. I love the subversions this movie takes on the whole babysitter and home invasion tropes. It made my top 10 list for Christmas horror, but it's still one of those kind of every other year type watches. Lights Out was the very last rewatch of this month, and I still really enjoy this film. Upon rewatches, it does feel more and more generic, but it's still an exceedingly unique premise for a horror movie. I love the themes that it presents because it could have gone an even more generic and lazy route trying to convert a short film into a feature, but they dig pretty deep with the sibling relationships, with abusive parenting relationships, and not in a very typical way. There's a lot of nuance in this movie concerning how parental abuse can manifest in different ways. However, mental illness is definitely not handled the best in this movie. It leaves a very dark aftertaste, but I still get very unsettled by this movie, and I love Diana. That's like my dream role right there. I want to be the creaky, ooky, spooky lady. And I suppose I'll leave it at that so we can get on to my new watches of old horror. Dead End and Jack Frost constituted my Christmas Day video, so go check that out. I did complete plot breakdowns of either movie. Santa's Sleigh would be up next. After 1,000 years of spreading Christmas cheer, Santa reverts back to his demonic ways of spreading fear for Christmas. This one was such a welcome surprise, but don't get me wrong, this easily could have also made it in with the other movies to deconstruct on Christmas for being quite horrendous, but it was leagues more entertaining than Jack Frost and Dead End. I actually really enjoyed it. Unfortunately, the best part of the movie is the opening 3 minutes, and it never quite recovers from that once you realize all those big actors are not actually going to be in this movie. But the lead is Douglas Smith from the 2017 bona fide classic The Bye Bye Man, the Pee Pee Poo Poo Man. And the other lead is Emily D. Raven from Once Upon a Time, so quite iconic casting. She's also very Australian, and so her American accent is a little rough around the edges. I love it. The best part is probably the fact that Santa Claus is played by a pro wrestler named Bill Goldberg, and he drops a lot of really fun one-liners. There's also this really stupid mythology that kind of fuels the plot of this movie, and so it makes it feel like an R-rated Disney Channel original. It's just fun. It's terribly written, but it's great. Next up is It's Me, Billy, the fan-made Black Christmas sequel. This unofficial sequel follows the granddaughter of Jess Bradford 50 years after the events of the original as she spends one last Christmas in her grandmother's old house. There's a surprising amount of character building in this and past and lore building in this, but it's still kind of obvious that it's just meant to pad out the runtime. They kind of gave her the Laurie Strode treatment, which I get it, because it's probably the best way to keep the fans engaged. However, one of my favorite things about the original is that we don't know what happens to Jess. I would have preferred another story, maybe kind of in the same vein as the original, that also maybe just involves Billy. No granddaughters, no more traumatized woman trope, just a fresh set of people having to deal with Billy. That maybe would have been a little bit more digestible for me, or if the story had a better twist. Like maybe we follow a character who knows that they're adopted or something, and then there's a big reveal that her grandmother is actually Jess. Anything to kind of shake it up, being beyond just a Halloween ripoff. Aside from that, I thought the quality was amazing. The lighting and the composition are gorgeous. The acting is okay. I think it's better than most fan films, but they also had Billy doing entirely too much. But I don't know if any horror movie could ever kind of capture the same understated performance as the original, because obviously you can't just do the same thing again. I think It's Me, Billy was a valiant effort, but I probably wouldn't revisit it. My last new watch of old horror would be The Mad Magician, so a much older watch. An illusionist becomes homicidal when his best kept magic secrets are stolen by his rival. This one was actually sent to me by a subscriber, so thank you for that. Excited to get into the other ones you sent as well. I described this movie as a spiritual sequel to The House of Wax from 1953. This one was 1954. And Vincent Price is on his homicidal shit again. It's great. I love this era of horror for how theatrical it was, and now I have this 50s gem as part of my collection, so I definitely recommend this one. Now what you've all been waiting for. Let's finally discuss all the new releases that I watched this month, starting with Violent Night. I consider this one to be horror, so just, okay. Violent Night follows Santa Claus as he battles mercenaries who take a wealthy family hostage for Christmas. Maybe this is just an action movie. I don't know. I don't care. It's really gory. There's suspense. I would consider it to be action horror, like Jurassic Park. I loved it personally, but you have to understand that the first act is terrible. It sets up the most annoying rich person cliches in the vein of Knives Out, but it's just not funny. So thank God that by the second act, the action picks up, and so too does the humor. Also, the stunt coordinators did not come to play. The deaths in this movie are so slapsticky and over the top, I couldn't get enough of it. This movie was basically like, actually, I don't think those robbers could have survived Home Alone. That's something the internet has speculated about for forever, and Violent Night was like, noted. Some really fun traps in the movie, the gore, the action, a likable little girl character, and John Leguizamo. That's already an amazing mix. But making Santa Claus be sexy David Harbour with a man bun, are we serious? That was the icing on the cake. I wanted to eat the crumbs out of his beard. I'm like a little mouse. That's disgusting. I'm sorry I made you visualize that. How about we get a move on? Speak No Evil is up next, which is a Danish Shudder original. On vacation, a Danish family becomes fast friends with a Dutch family. They agree to go to their house for a holiday, but when they arrive, it's not quite what they had imagined. I actually did a video on this movie for my Patreon as well, where I did a really fast kind of plot breakdown for it, because this movie is rough. I don't know if I really recommend this one, though it is very well done. I'm just not personally a fan of feel-bad movies. This is very similar to something like Eden Lake, and this might be the feel-bad movie of the year. Be real careful going into this one. If you can't handle things like child abuse, then I maybe would not give this one a go. Also, if you get far too uncomfortable by social faux pas horror, this one is also not for you. This movie successfully made me extremely anxious, so it is effective. The horror is good, but it's not horror that I seek out. I usually go into movies very blind, and so sometimes I just accidentally do this to myself. So I'm torn. I would just look up triggers for this movie if you need to, because I do kind of want to recommend it, but also I don't, because I don't want you to feel the same way that I did when it was over. I know I'm probably just really piquing your curiosity right now, and that's not really my intention. I also have zero patience for stupid protagonists. This movie will make you want to yell at the screen, so do with all of that whatever you will. I don't even know how to wrap this one up. Similarly, A Wounded Fawn left me quite befuddled. This follows a new couple as they go away to his cabin in the woods far outside of the city. This one was good until it wasn't. It didn't subvert enough of the tropes that it was following until the third act, when it becomes this huge swing of a surrealist nightmare, and I don't think that was to the movie's benefit. It didn't make any sense. Hereditary and Midsommar both knew how to take nonsense and make me buy into it. Like, yes, put that man in that bear. This movie didn't do that at all. I was constantly asking, but why? And also, what the fuck? Great performances though, and it's well well done. I just personally didn't like the direction that it took. Surrogate is up next, an Australian film. It's a ghost horror about a single mother and nurse Natalie who falls mysteriously ill and struggles to stop her family from being destroyed. This one I probably wouldn't have checked out had the director not reached out to me, but unfortunately it just didn't really do it for me. It's quite very drab. I wish they used the cheap trick of using really colorful lighting to give the movie a little more depth and style. Also, they set up this really genuinely compelling mystery in the first act that's pretty much dropped as it sort of morphs into something else. The story itself was interesting, but the execution was really bland and it ended up being pretty generic. It's free on Tubi though if you're interested. Christmas Bloody Christmas was the exact opposite. Tori and Robbie spend their Christmas Eve talking music and getting hammered until a military-grade assassination weapon in the form of a robot Santa starts terrorizing the town. This was one of the biggest surprises of the year. I loved it. This is one of the only horror movies, if not the only horror movie of 2022 to be shot on 16mm, and I can't shut up about it. It looks so good. It's dripping in style. It's very much giving the same aesthetic as the original Black Christmas. I love the leads, and if they're not your kind of people, you're not gonna like them, but I wanted to be their friends. Their dialogue was so naturalistic, they had so much chemistry, and so they were really fun to root for. There's also a sex scene in this movie where the sole focus is on feminine pleasure. I was like, get out of town. When is that ever the case? Like, come on now. It's almost never the case in real life, I'll tell you that much. I love seeing that in movies. I love when my pleasure is considered. And then when the man expects nothing in return, like what planet are we on right now? Anyway, this also had incredible gore, and then it was really climactic until it wasn't. One of my only issues is that this movie just had so many false endings. I don't like that. There was a phenomenal ending to this movie, and then it just kept ending and ending and ending and ending. So that's something to consider, as well as the fact that the Santa robot doesn't really come off as much of a robot for a lot of the movie. But just give your brain the little train of thought that this is just a highly advanced military-grade weapon. Of course he just looks like a guy in a Santa suit. Those are really my only qualms with the movie. Otherwise, I think it's perfect. It's grungy and gritty and sexy and stylish, and now it's one of my favorite Christmas horror movies of all time. Unfortunately, that's probably the last movie of the day that I'll recommend to you. Glorious is one that I may recommend, but it depends on how weird your tastes are. Wes ends up at a remote rest stop bathroom in the wake of a breakup. When an enigmatic figure begins speaking to him from the next stall, he realizes he's in a potentially dangerous situation. This movie is so weird, and potential light spoiler, it's a very Lovecraftian film. You learn that very early on though, and I feel like that is the draw for anyone who actually does want to watch this. J.K. Simmons plays the voice that emanates from the bathroom stall glory hole, which I think is an inspired choice. It was just a little bit much for me and a little too similar to Color Out of Space while not having as good of a plot. Obviously, Lovecraftian stuff gets a little bit nuts, and our human brains are not always meant to comprehend everything that happens. But this one was rough because you start out thinking that his breakup and going through that trauma is going to kind of be the main through line, and then it's sort of not. You'd think that it would fuel some character development or something, but nothing is just ever fleshed out enough. So by the time that things start getting really wacky and kind of fun, you're just not buying into it anymore because the movie's not meeting its potential. It's a bit of a frustrating watch for me because if you're gonna make a horror movie centered on a glory hole, then take it there. Weirdly though, I do feel like I would eventually rewatch this movie because to my knowledge, there's nothing else quite like it. Finally, the very last movie that I watched in the year of 2022 was one of the worst movies I ever watched that year. It Hatched was a horror pack exclusive that I received last month, and so my dad and I threw that on together. You can use my affiliate code, which is down below, to get a discount on your first box, by the way. I don't get anything out of you doing that, by the way. It's not sponsored. But anyway, there's always one movie in the pack each month that only horror pack is distributing, and this month it was It Hatched. A couple moves back to Iceland, buying an old house with plans to turn it into a B&B. After some strange visions, Peter discovers a hole in the basement, and his wife gives birth to an egg. This movie was terrible right from the get-go, like one that you know right when you turn it on how bad it's gonna be. I was also hungover. I was so not in the mood to be watching a movie that bad, but my dad was like, let's just keep watching it. So I was really sleepy. I passed out, took a nap before the movie was over. But from what I did see, the only thing this movie has going for it is the style. As you probably saw, it's extremely colorful with the lighting, which like I said is a great low budget option, and it gives the movie a very unique feel. However, I don't understand why almost the entire thing was shot on wide lenses. It was like close-ups. We don't know her. It led to a very uncomfortable feeling, and maybe that was the intention, I don't know. But it's also supposed to be a dark comedy, and from the synopsis, you're probably thinking, oh wow, yeah, that must have been crazy. No, they didn't take things far enough with the comedy or the horror, and so it's not scary, it's not funny, it's just dumb. At one point, the husband, Peter, he's having a vision of like some naked old man wearing an animal mask, and it's like, you can't really scare me with naked men anymore. Do you know how many unsolicited dick pics I've received in my life? And how it's only gotten worse with YouTube. Fucking try it, I'll expose you right on the timeline. No, but also that was done in Hereditary, and I think Midsommar too, so it doesn't really work as a mechanism to disarm me anymore. It's just weird. I obviously do not recommend it. I probably won't even keep my Blu-ray of it. I think I also need to get my dad onto a Patreon video talking about that movie because he watched more of it than I did. My lightweight hungover ass was falling asleep with my mouth open while it was playing, and I always love to hear his blunt opinions on the matter. I'm sure my patrons would as well. Speaking of them, a huge shout out to the people that keep this channel funded. They also have a producing credit on my content because they do fund it, and also sometimes I like to get their input on what content I should make next. So if that's interesting to you, then you can find the link to that down below. On that note, I finally watched The Mist from 2007 last night, as well as The Addams Family from the 90s. So I think I'm gonna have to film a Patreon video right now because, oh my god, The Mist, that ending, insane. If that's not for you, then all the rest of my social media is linked down below. Go crazy, go nuts over there. I hope that you enjoyed this video, and I hope I catch you in the next one where I'm probably gonna be reviewing Megan. I'll see you then. Bye!